Sure, it's the summertime and everything is starting to heat up here. And so is Crossout. Looks like we got ourselves here another update. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. So either way, welcome back everybody. Today we're talking about the brand new devlog here, updating us on the brand new stuff coming to the next season here, revolving around the Dawn's Children and the Ravages. And not to get too shabby here, it's actually quite interesting stuff here. So for the first part here, we do have ourselves the nice lovely like cabin, the Coronos, which is actually a very interesting cabin in the sense that it can restore durability to weapons mounted on its various power points. So if you can actually take a look here on the cabin itself, you can see quite a few little attachment points here. And these are where actually armor or other weapons or modules or whatever it may be can be attached to the car, and when upon activating a perk, gradually restores durability to the actual attached parts itself. Now, there's actually a weird mechanic associated with this, in that not only can it repair your parts, but the only way you can actually charge up that repair mechanic, which has a limited amount of durability it can actually bestow upon any attached part, is that you must actually be standing near Rex, friendly or enemy Rex. And that standing upon it slowly builds up a charge, and then once you activate the charge, that's how you restore that durability. So it incentivizes you to almost be turtling behind Armor Rex itself. Now, don't dismay, this is not going to be the infinite HP build that everyone thinks it's going to be. There's only a limited amount of parts you can actually mount on this car that'll actually restore its durability to, for one, and then two, it is also a light type cabin, which means that itself won't have a large amount of overall HP. And from what I understand too, it doesn't actually restore durability to the cabin itself, although I may be wrong on that. So another thing to note too is that if you actually take damage while you're slowly accumulating these durability charges, is that the durability charge rate will actually slow down considerably. So you don't want to be taking damage necessarily while getting these wrecks up. So it actually is interesting to see how this actual cabin fares out. I'm curious if this will be great with some sort of light machine gun hover build that also utilizes shields to hover around wrecks. That might be an interesting thing too. Plus, I'm also curious if this thing actually accumulates charges while you're invisible as well. But fun little car to see how that'll turn out. Plus, I like the fact that there is actually mounting points in the back for durability. So anything that you have mounted back there will actually go ahead and gradually heal up too. So kind of nice. Beyond that, we also have a couple of little changes here coming to the actual tracks in the game, as well as a few cabins here that have not seen any sort of light of day for a hot second. But let's go ahead and go over some of the tracks. So the small track here has a little perk here that goes ahead and reduces its spread of any weapons attached to the car at a certain speed. So I'm guessing at a higher speed you'll have a reduced spread, which is pretty good because at any sort of high speed you will tend to have a higher spread, so it's kind of evens it out overall. Plus the fact that it's on a track nonetheless is actually quite nice, so for any sort of light build this will be very beneficial. Although to keep in mind that pretty much anything beyond small tracks attached to your car will go ahead and reduce this perk considerably. So if you have a half track design with 2 wheels and 2 half tracks, you won't necessarily get the actual benefit of these small tracks as well. You still get some, but not terribly much, so keep that in mind. Beyond that, the Slipnir itself will have rotation speed increased by a certain amount, no movement speed required whatsoever, but it still has the track requirement, so you must have at least all tracks or some tracks on it to actually maintain this perk. But it's quite nice in the sense that you still get that weapon rotation speed at any speed. So you don't have to be traveling 80 kilometers an hour or 0, you still get that weapon speed turn. So for any sort of turreted cannon builds or any caucus build, this will be absolutely fantastic. Beyond that, we got ourselves here the reinforced track, which will go ahead and increase the durability of other reinforced tracks by a certain amount. I'm not sure what that is, because that certain amount kind of dictates how well it'll perform, but hey, reinforced track getting a little extra beefy is always quite nice. And if you don't know what that is, that would be... I'm guessing it's going to be this boy, because there isn't no quote-unquote reinforced track. There is a hardened track, there's an armor track, there's a tank track, there's a Goliath, but there is no reinforced. It's always weird because I feel there's always some weird mistranslation. But go ahead, durability is 600 anyway, so fairly beefy little track here. And I'm guessing it'll probably be a 25% or so increase if I had to guess. Which won't make it like the absolute creme de la crop, but is still somewhat useful. The only downside is that any sort of durability perk, unless it's directed at weapons, is not really as effective, because that's the main thing that actually improves your overall success with the build, is how well your weapons can perform. Do they last longer? Do they deal more damage? Do they have better spread characteristics with it? By not necessarily having that, it does make it a bit unusual. Next thing, we have the tank track here, which after a certain amount of car durability loss, which does mean is the actual HP of the car, or does it mean how much damage like from the extraneous armor parts it takes? I'm not quite sure. But after a certain amount of durability loss here, the speed and power will increase. I'm not sure if that is going to be like as soon as you hit like a 50% damage threshold, you get like a 10% speed and power increase, or if it's like it gradually builds up over time. I'm not quite sure how it actually is. It just kind of sounds like it's a toggle switch. But either way, it actually does sound pretty interesting for the tank track, which I believe is this chunky boy right here, which already has a max speed of 60 kilometers an hour. And I imagine for any sort of build that's using it with a cabin power reduction to 55% will definitely be very beneficial with this. The interesting thing about this, though, is that you cannot have any other type of other movement part mounted on this. So no hovers, no armor tracks, no Goliaths. It can only be tank tracks if you want to use this perk at all. Although considering the absolute size of this thing, I mean, you're not going to really be putting much else on the car when you're using it. And it looks like here for the armor track is that within a certain radius of a certain number of opponents, the damage protection of the structural part increases, which is a bit interesting to say. So essentially, if you're surrounded by enemies, your tracks themselves will go ahead and be even extra beefier, which is actually kind of beneficial because for a low-lying build like this sometimes, that if you use like a medium cabin, you can actually get a fairly large amount of protection from this tank track itself, this armor track I should say. And it already has an absolute durability of 1300 points, so if you're surrounded by enemies, this can actually be very beneficial. And it'll actually, if it increases the durability of it, I wonder if that means the tank track itself will have just a larger amount of HP. And then beyond that, it looks like the Goliath itself will have a durability bonus for all parts attached to the Goliath itself, which is actually quite a bit of a big thing, because if you have any sort of parts attached to the outside of it here, so if you have like machine guns, cannons, whatever, they will actually receive a durability bonus on top of this car already having 1600 parts of durability per part. So it's definitely very nice and a large amount of resistance. So cannons, whatever it may be attached here, will get a large amount of durability. I'm a big fan of it. Downside, that means you kind of have to attach your part near the outside. But even if you just have armor strapped to this thing, that means I'm guessing the armor itself will actually receive a durability increase too. Meaning that this thing could probably have a fair bit extra survivability if you actually successfully coat this thing in armor. So kind of an interesting perk to have with that. I'm guessing it's going to make the Goliath even more tanky. And if they wanted to make it even extra too, they could add the damage resistance the Goliath has to all their damage parts too. Oh, that'd be sweet. Although I'm also kind of curious if this means that the frames itself that attach to the tracks, if those will also receive a durability bonus too, considering that's on the inside of it, so the frames would be attached here. I'm guessing that would make sense, but who knows? Beyond that, the hot rod cabin here was changed from a medium to a light cabin, special rarity now, with a corresponding increase in power score and maximum speed, which is actually kind of like a theme with all of these cabins here, except for the Torero. But with that, they added a perk here that increases the accuracy of the mounted weapons by 15%, which is massive. Downside is that a lot of these actual parts they're talking about here were pack parts from a long time ago, so they're technically in here, but as you can imagine, they're not being sold in the absolute slightest at all. Now, theoretically, you can still purchase these. For example, you can buy this one here that has a car part for about 30 bucks. Downside, is it going to be worth it? Questionably. Not to mention, too, that there's already a lot more common of a part already that exists within the game, and that is the Torero, that has pretty much the exact same perk. So the Torero here increases the accuracy of all mounted weapons by 30% instead of 15%. Downside, also a bit higher for power score. Although the power score difference is really not that much of a difference, because it's only a power score difference of 200, but the perk is nearly doubled, which is kind of a lot, to be honest. A 15% increase may not sound like a lot, but if you're doing any of these sort of sniping build or machine gun build, having an actual much tighter shot can actually be a huge send for trying to strip off weapons, especially if you're spamming a lot and things. So we'll have to see about that. It's a good perk, but I'm curious about that power score if it's a little bit too high to really make the hot rod that good. Beyond that, the jockey, pretty much same story all around. Go ahead, pause and take a look at the stat increase. But the main benefit is that the perk here is that it'll increase the damage of weapons and drones as long as there's an enemy vehicle within 25 meters of you. 10% is achieved over 10 seconds. So a flat 10% bonus achieved while being in the presence of enemies is actually pretty substantial, especially if you're any sort of brawling based build. And it has a considerably less power score at only 1100, interestingly enough. And the durability is reduced. So if you don't know, the jockey is this lovely jalopy right here. Again, still a pack part, but oddly thing is, there is no pack that contains this anymore, so there is no way to buy this, except trying to buy it on the auction house. But as you can see, there's a lot of buy orders of 52 and exactly 0 sell orders. So, good luck. So next we got the Carapace here, which honestly is just aesthetically beautiful here, but kind of fallen to the wayside in more recent patches. But interesting perk with this is that when enemies are within a radius of 115 meters, which actually seems like kind of a lot, and the more enemies there are, the faster it charges, But pressing a button, it speeds up weapon reloading by 30% for 6 seconds. So very, very similar to that of the Cyberus cabin, I believe? No, sorry, Echo. Oh yeah, it has the same radius requirement too. This one is a 50% increase for 7 seconds, except this one is now going to be, what was it, 30% for 6? So slightly less weapon reloading and for 1 less second. But the power score difference is 400 here, which can actually be quite considerable. And that Carapace is in that heavy category too, so it does have a excellent amount of tonnage and mass limit. And with that too, it'll actually have a speed increase of nearly 10 kilometers an hour, which is actually quite nice. So for any sort of lower power score reload build, this could actually be a great addition to have. Downside, again, also a crafting and pack part here, which right now is, oh wow, $65. What a steal! Oddly enough, the price of the Carapace cabin has been going down for many weeks now, only just slightly ticking up here. Downside, though, is that because the market is unable to adjust for market demands, it is actually not probably going to be sold for a while, because a lot of people don't want to sell it because it's theoretically worth a lot more, but you can't sell it for what it's worth because of the market corridors. It's a weird thing because those market corridors were meant to kind of solve the issue of big ballers buying out an entire market and flipping it for a huge profit. But the issue is that now, is that instead of that happening occasionally, what happens more frequently is that low volume items like this cannot respond to market demand nearly as quickly. We have 231 buy orders and 1 sell order, and there's already 24 buy orders at 1 price. What? I don't know. Eventually they might remove price corridors. One can hope, but my goodness. And then beyond that, there was a slight change to the Torero here, which just changes it from a medium to a light cabin, but also increases the power score by an additional 300. They say MP, but power score is what they mean. Which, kind of rough for a Torero cabin like this, which I think actually puts it, yeah. Okay, so it's not the absolute worst in terms of power score. I actually didn't know that every single light cabin here has a power score of exactly 1800. That's a bit weird. And yet all the medium cabins here have a power score of 1500. Interesting. I'm kind of curious as to why they did that, as opposed to based off like its effectiveness or its perk. But other than that, none of the actual parameters around it has really changed. But that kind of makes sense though, because the Torero, I mean, we're pretty much like the default best cabin you could get for a lot of medium builds. It was just basically applicable to everything. But that's pretty much my thoughts on this brand new little season here. What do you guys think about this actual little dev blog here? Are you guys excited for this brand new season? What other changes would you like to see in this little season? And beyond that, what other powers would you like to see as well? Let me know down below. But beyond that, I want to thank you all again for watching this fabulous video. If you had fun, follow on the platform, is your favorite on that YouTube and that Twitch. Beyond that, there's also Twitter and Discord if you want to get notified whenever I go live, as well as to join the community. But beyond that, I want to thank you all again. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.